one. I think we all...
So the question I'm going to throw at you today is, what do you do to make sure that your kids love their Judaism? I'm hearing the sounds of a little bit of recognition / cynicism coming through over here. Okay, so maybe I should ask the question differently. Is it fair to say that it's a challenge to make our children... I don't like the word make, but you understand what I'm getting at. Is it a challenge to have our children love their Judaism? Let's put it that way.
At times.
At times.
When they're little, it's obviously awesome.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. When they're young, it's all good.
But when it turns into a job, it's a balmy age.
Right. Okay. So the nice thing about little kids is any Jewish event that's coming is this massive thing in their lives, and there's a lot of excitement around it. The preparation beforehand, the songs, etc., etc. And because there are many Jewish occasions during the year, that kind of keeps them going. So as you finish Purim, so you're talking about Pesach, and after Pesach they do something either related to the Omer or at least to Lag BaOmer, and then there's Shavuos. And then there's a little bit of a dry spell because you can't exactly excite children with Tisha B'Av. But then you've got Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and then it's Chanukah. So yeah, I think for the little kids it's a lot easier. And also they don't necessarily, as you say, they don't have that much responsibility. They don't have the so-called job associated, or the jobs associated with Judaism, so it's a little bit easier. And as they start to get older, so what are the challenges? What do we find to be the challenges with older kids and the enthusiasm around their Judaism? It's going to be different for different people, right? It's going to depend also what environment your child is in, who their friends are. So let's say, for argument's sake, you're trying to keep Shabbos and all of your kids' friends don't keep Shabbos. So that's going to be a huge challenge. And the same thing would apply to keeping kosher. It'd be a similar kind of challenge. So you can't go to this person's house, but they're having a big party. Yes, I know, but you can't go to that party. So those are going to certainly be some of the challenges. But let's put those aside. What are in other words, without the peer influences, what are the challenges in our own space, with our own, just trying to keep the flame, trying to keep the excitement and enthusiasm of Judaism?
Davening in the school holidays.
Okay, there's a great example. There's a great example, right? So a child will go to school. At school, it's part of the process, it's part of the routine. They daven, come home, forget about it. It's like pulling teeth. It's like pulling teeth. How do you get them to daven? It's like... Okay, that's a great example. And I hate to say it, that's one of those examples that doesn't necessarily resolve that quickly. It could be years of struggle. Okay, so there's a great example. What else? What about Shabbos? Don't you find...
I find Shabbos boring.
Shabbos, yeah.
Yes, like if we
right?
play with him, it's boring.
And Shabbos can be very boring. Bear in mind that we live in a community where there is an Eruv, people use the Eruv. That means that people do go to other people on Shabbos. Now imagine you live in a community that doesn't have an Eruv, or that doesn't use the Eruv, and then you're completely trapped at home, so that could be very boring. That's real. That's real for kids.
Mine's food.
What do you mean food?
Like,
kosher food.
Yeah,
Why can't we have?
The same level.
Right? So why can't we have what they're having, and it's not fair, and they're going to such a fun place and I'm never allowed to go. Yeah. Okay, so there are various challenges, right? There are various challenges. So how do we address those challenges? So what do we do? So have the child who's complaining that they're bored on Shabbos, the child doesn't want to daven, the child has issues around kosher food, and a variety of other things. So how do we address it?
So we have a chart, and it's crazy, like a schedule for the day.
Right.
And then he needs to know. So like if he wakes up at 6 o'clock, then he needs to play for half an hour. There's a clock next to his bed, and then then when I wake up, then I play with him for an hour before we go to shul.
Oh, wow.
And then if it's lunchtime, then he lets me rest for a little bit, and then I'll play with him for an hour. Or so it's for him it has to be very structured.
Okay, so you've created a management structure.
Yes.
The management structure is clearly illustrated because you've got this chart, and he anticipates what's going to happen, and you're able...
If you don't stick to
Okay, so again, his challenge is Shabbos and the boredom of Shabbos. So your response is we create a structure around Shabbos, and using that structure, which is very visual and very reliable, he knows that Shabbos is not going to be so devastatingly boring. Okay, it sounds like a plan. Sounds like, for how long has it been running?
Couple of hours.
And so far so good. So far so good. By the way, predictability works with children, right? Having that sense of predictability really helps. Okay, what else? Any other methods that work? Okay, now
This is who we are.
this is who we are.
Yeah,
This is us.
yeah.
This is us. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Don't say take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Don't say take it or leave it, because you never know what they'll choose.
Exactly.
And what special Shabbos games that we keep for Shabbos?
Okay, that's clever. So you have special Shabbos games, so there's like an excitement because those games only come out on Shabbos. See, I think the thing is this, that naturally when we have these conversations, what goes on in all of our heads is we immediately go to the area of crisis. So you ask the question, how do I get my child to love their Judaism? Naturally we think, okay, well, this is where I think they're not loving it at the moment. And then we want to somehow medicate that part that's not as healthy as it should be, right? They don't love this part of Judaism, so what should I be doing? How can I address it? I think that's basically how we handle these things. And really the conversation that I want to have today is a little bit of a different conversation. So instead of focusing on the specifics, because we'll all have at least one particular area of challenge. So we've identified 3 basic areas of challenge over here: kosher food, Shabbos, davening. Okay, those are not the only. They're certainly not exclusive. And just because one is an area of challenge doesn't mean you don't have other areas of challenge. But let's broaden this out a little bit. Broaden it out. If you had to ask a child, let's say that you have a son who's a massive sports fan, okay, a big soccer fan, and you had to ask this child, so tell me something, how much do you love the team that you support, whatever it is, Liverpool, Man United, whoever it is that they support? How much do you love it? Like, how much pride do you have in your team? How much do you enjoy watching soccer? They're not going to struggle to answer that question. Oh, I love them, they're amazing, and they can give you all these names. Like, these are kids who can't remember one page of homework for a test, but they can give you all the stats on how this team was in the last season, and who's being transferred to which place for how much money, right? They know all of that stuff. So if you had to ask, let's say for argument's sake, you have a child who is they've got a particular TV show, that's their favorite TV show, and the characters of that TV show are their heroes. So you have to ask that child about that TV show. There's no hesitation. They're so excited. I mean, it's like you've opened the sluice gates. You bring up that topic, and then they just go. And by the way, it's not only that. It's not only things that children idolize. Every one of us at some point is going to have that child who has ideas, and they have to share those ideas with us in graphic detail. Right, the idea of how they're going to save the world, or what they're going to do for the whales, or how they're going to make a lot of money, or whatever it is. And once they start, they're so enthusiastic and they're so excited. So my question is a broader question. How excited are they about Judaism? Not about a specific area that is either a challenge to them or not a challenge, but how excited generally are our children about Judaism? Right, that's an important question. Obviously, different kids have different personalities, and they'll express themselves differently, and then they'll be at different stages and ages, so they'll express themselves differently there too, right? But ultimately, the question we need to ask ourselves is, do our kids love their Judaism? Forget about the fact that they may have certain challenges, but do they love their Judaism? They love their sports team. They love the TV show. They love their fashion. They love their grand ideas in their imagination. Do they love their Judaism? Interesting question, right? In other words, can we distinguish between the particular areas of their Judaism that they find to be challenging and their overall attitude towards their Judaism? Okay, so I'm not asking you to necessarily score your kids, at least not publicly, but it's something to think about, right? So do they love their Judaism? And then I'm going to ask one other question, which is really going to be the key that we're going to speak about. Did you love Judaism growing up? Now, this is not a question of were you religious growing up? This is not a question of did you go to shul? Did you daven every day? Did you keep Shabbos? Did you keep kosher? Just a broad question. Did you love your Judaism growing up? Okay, so let's throw that out. Did you love your Judaism growing up?
You want us to answer?
Yeah.
So I think I wasn't
Engaged enough.
I wasn't shown it enough.
You weren't shown it
The
enough.
minute I started learning about it, then I loved it.
Okay.
As a young kid, no, I didn't.
No. So
Sure, once or twice a year kind of thing.
okay. So you went to shul once or twice a year. So I'm gonna push the question a little bit. So what do you remember that you did Jewishly as a kid?
Then, before,
Yes, then when you were a child, what do you remember? What memories do you have of your Jewish experience?
like a Seder and Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, that's fine, right? So that's kind of what I expected you were going to say.
Shabbos Supper.
And a Shabbos Supper.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's push this further. Okay, so going to shul does not stand out as a highlight of your experience of Judaism as a child. Okay, so what do you have now? You've got a Pesach Seder and you've got a Rosh Hashanah, and dare I say, Rosh Hashanah dinner, as opposed to a Rosh Hashanah shul. I mean, correct? And shul as well. Okay, good. And a Friday night supper.
Yes.
Family supper. Okay, now let's push it further. So it's a Seder, a Pesach Seder. What do you remember from your childhood Pesach Seder that you remember fondly? Because we're coming up for Pesach, so we'll use the Seder, right? I mean, you clearly remember the Seder, right? So there's a positive association. There's a positive association that you have with the Seder. So my question to you is, the positive association is with what? What happened at the Seder that you have a positive association with? It could just simply be the fact that the whole family was sitting around the table and it was a lot of fun because they were the cousins or whatever the case, but it could be
It
that.
wasn't how I do a Seder now.
Right. Okay, that's fine. But I'm Stafka pushing over here. I hope you don't mind. I'm pushing over here to ask the question. So tell me one thing that ever happened at a Seder when you were a child that you have a fond memory of. Besides the fact that it was this big hullabaloo of all the family coming together, and that was a lot of fun. But it was anything that's
The only thing that stands out is the way my aunt used to do the eggs and salt water.
okay, great. Perfect. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so the way that your aunt did eggs and salt water. So tell us what?
She grated them. She grated the eggs.
She grated the eggs and then?
And that's just how I remember it, I'm saying.
Right. Do you remember eating the egg and salt water?
No.
No. Okay, perfect. So you don't remember eating the egg and salt water, but the fact is you remember the egg and salt water. Perfect. Okay, anybody else up for this this level of interrogation?
I also weren't religious at all. And I remember the Seder, we used to dress up. And my father, that was all my cousins used to dress up.
Dress up to the theme. Just dress up to the theme of Pesach.
Yeah, all the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea, we all had
Right.
to do something.
Okay? Okay, so that is fun, right? So that is fun. Okay, so that stood out. Okay, besides Pesach, what else? What other Jewish things kind of stand out?
Purim and Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, so, and anything specific around, let's leave Purim. Purim's too easy. Rosh Hashanah. What stands out about Rosh Hashanah? Anything?
Apples and honey.
Apples and honey. Thank you. Exactly. Who, as a child, did not get excited for apples and honey? Whether you ate it or not is irrelevant. Whether you enjoyed apples and honey is irrelevant. The fact that there were apples and honey captured the imagination of the child. It does. It captures the imagination. Like egg and salt water. Okay, so I'm not going to use the example of dressing up only for one reason. It's because it's unique to your family as opposed to something which is universal. So I'm trying to find things that are universal that we do as Jewish people that stand out or stood out for kids. Now let's look at our own kids. If you had to ask your children, what's their favorite part? It doesn't have to be their favorite part. What parts of the Seder stand out for them? Now you're doing a Seder that's a lot more advanced than what you had when you were growing up, and you read more words and you keep more to the halachic requirements or whatever. What do you think your kids will say stands out for them about the Pesach Seder every year?
The songs.
The songs, right? Okay, definitely.
Plague packs and all the...
Okay, the plague packs and all that. That's all that, let's be honest, the whole plague thing, little frogs and all that stuff is very contemporary. So obviously it's going to stand out because that was designed, it's not part of the traditional thing, right? Okay, so I want to know how many kids love reading the Haggadah? Like that's their highlight. The reading of the Haggadah.
I say my kids did enjoy it last year for the first time.
For the first time.
They're getting to that age.
Okay, because they're older.
and they'd learned it at school. and
Okay.
then-
So you had a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe they had things that they could share and they
Yeah.
could read and whatever the case is. Fine,
Cousins
perfect,
and laughing and
perfect.
enjoyable.
I remember we used to have somebody used to come to our Seder, and when I was in primary school, my Hebrew was a lot better than my father's Hebrew. So my father had become frum later in life, and I had a full Jewish education from the youngest age. So this individual used to come to our Seder, always used to tell my father to make me read, because it would be much quicker, right? I don't think that many people love reading the Haggadah. I do think you're doing well if you've reached the point that your kids do enjoy reading the Haggadah. That's real progress, and that's great, and it's not necessarily everybody's experience. Okay, so songs, that's more universal. Okay, what else is more universal? I'm surprised nobody said it yet. What about matzah? The afikoman. The afikoman is a highlight. No question about it. Whoever came up with afikoman, it is the most brilliant way to keep the children going way longer at the Pesach Seder than they would naturally go. Because there's a treasure hunt, there's the promise of a prize, there's the competitiveness, which of the siblings or cousins or whoever you might happen to have at your Seder table is going to be the one to get it. Unless, of course, you have the Oprah Pesach Seder, then everybody gets a prize, no matter who finds the afikoman. So that's brilliant psychology, right? Okay. Rosh Hashanah, we said apples and honey. Okay? I think it's fair to say that Rosh Hashanah and Pesach are the two big holidays that really stick out for the so-called non-traditional Jew. Let's talk about Shabbos for a moment. So what are the memories that a child has of Shabbos, Friday night? Let's talk about Friday night Shabbos. What are the memories that a child has? The fond memories.
Like you mean the challah and that, or the family?
Yeah, exactly. What do kids remember? You remember challah, you remember gefilte fish. Let's be honest. If not for Friday night, I don't think any human on the planet would eat gefilte fish. Right? It's unique. It's like a unique thing that is locked into Shabbos. Right? Maybe it's chicken soup and knedlach, or maybe for some people that's a Pesach memory. So there'll always be a culinary connection that people have to a particular holiday. And I remember there was a guy that I knew growing up, and he came from a very religious family, and after he left school, he dropped everything. Completely. Like went literally to the opposite extreme. And he did fairly well in his, he was a professional, he did fairly well in his practice. And he reached the point he was driving around in a convertible. I think it was a BMW, I don't remember what it was, but he used to drive around in a convertible. And here's this guy without a yarmulke, who didn't keep anything. He had ditched Shabbos, he had ditched kashrus, he had ditched everything. And he would drive the streets of Joburg with his top down of his convertible, blasting the songs of Avraham Fried and Mordechai ben David. Why? Because when he was a child, those were the songs of his Judaism. And he had such a strong affinity to those songs that that was his connection. That became his connection to his Judaism. On one occasion, he told me, because we stayed in touch. In fact, he passed away, unfortunately, prematurely. The last Pesach Seder of his life he had at our house. So at that Pesach Seder, he told me the story. He was once driving in Rosebank, at the Rosebank shopping center, and he was driving into the parking lot, and there were some yeshiva bochrim. So he turned up his Avraham Fried that was playing, and he said he watched their faces. They couldn't believe, what's this guy, who doesn't look like he has any religious connection playing this music. He got a lot of nachas out of that. What's the common denominator between these things? The egg and salt water, the afikoman, the songs, the gefilte fish, the challah. What's the common denominator between all of these things? Besides the fact that we all love them, right? What's the common denominator?
Like a bond, like a memory.
Memory. But why? Why do these things make the memories? So what we'll see, what's fascinating? The common denominator is between all of those things. Not one of them is required. Nowhere in the Torah does it say you have to have the egg and salt water at the Seder. Nor does it say that you have to sing songs. The mitzvah of the Pesach Seder is to tell the story. It's not mandated that you have to sing songs. It's mandated that you have to read the paragraphs of Hallel, which are praise to Hashem. So yes, if it's praise to Hashem, you're going to sing. It's not mandated that you have to sing. There is no requirement to eat challah. Everybody thinks like it's some kind of big mitzvah that you have to eat challah. Who says you have to eat challah? If you took 2 pitas out of the freezer and you put them together, you'd fulfill the mitzvah. You have to have 2 breads. Nobody said they have to be challah breads. But could you imagine the non-frum Jewish South African coming to the Friday night table without 2 challahs? That's heresy. They would say, you can't do that. That's why we find this incredible story which unfolds every single Friday, of people who go to non-kosher bakeries to get challah. Kashrut is mandated clearly in the Torah. Challah is a tradition that found its way into society a number of generations ago. What do people do? They go get the challah, which is traditional, without paying attention to the law of kashrus. How? How does that happen? How does that happen? Same thing with Rosh Hashanah. What does everybody remember about Rosh Hashanah? Apples dipped in honey. It's a tradition. You don't have to have apples in honey. What do you think happens if a person, let's say for argument's sake, it won't happen today because we import fruit, but you honestly believe that in every society where Jews lived, at every period in history, they always had access to apples at Rosh Hashanah time? There was no Woolworths that imported stuff from who knows where. There were no greenhouses where they could produce things all year round.
But then where does the honey come from? Isn't honey from the sweet to make it a sweet yogurt?
To make it a sweet yogurt. Does it say in the Torah, when you read the Torah, that when it describes the festival of Rosh Hashanah in the Torah, does it say, thou shalt do sweet things for a sweet year? No. What does it say? You know what the Torah says about Rosh Hashanah? Don't do work. In other words, don't drive to shul, because that's considered work. And hear the shofar. Those are the mitzvahs. What does everybody get all hung up on? Apples in honey. It's a fascinating thing. You get people who don't observe the basics of Judaism. But the challah has to be round. Has to be round challah. Why does it have to? I don't know. It has to have raisins. Why does it have to? I don't know, but you have to have challah with raisins. It's fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating. Friday night. So what's the most important thing about Shabbos? If a person really wanted to have a relationship with Shabbos, what's the most important thing about Shabbos? To rest? No? Isn't that what it says? To rest? And then the Torah defines how you rest. You don't do these things. What's the most important thing for the average Jewish person who's not so frum on Shabbos? You have to have Friday night dinner together. Okay, you're right that it's part of the laws of Shabbos that you're supposed to have special meals and that. But who says you have to bring the whole family together? Who says you have to make this mishugas? How often have I had people come to me and say, Rabbi, the fact that my child has started to keep Shabbos is destroying our family's Shabbos. Because they used to always come for Friday night dinner, and now they insist that they can't come anymore for Friday night dinner. It's destroying our family Shabbos. Fascinating, right? 1,000,001 things like this. Let me ask you another question. Can a pregnant woman go to a cemetery? Everybody knows this. Everybody knows. Absolutely, without question, pregnant women may not go to the cemetery. So I'll ask you another question. Where does it say it? Is it one of the 613 mitzvahs that a pregnant woman may not go to the cemetery? No. Where did it come from? It's a tradition. It's a tradition. But in the Jewish community, it is held as one of the holy grails of Judaism. You know how often I have people phone me up, Rabbi, nobody knows I'm pregnant yet. But what should I do? It's a very close friend's father's funeral. Do I go, don't I go? If I don't go, everyone's going to know I'm pregnant. Chas v'sholem, anybody should know I'm pregnant. Where does it say that in the Torah? Nobody's allowed to know that you're pregnant. Where does it say it? I'm not saying that you have to go advertise that. We are careful about these things. We don't share good news prematurely, etc. But to say in the Torah, thou shalt not tell people you're pregnant. Thou shalt not go to a funeral in case people think it. Where does it say it? The same person who phones with that urgent call has never in their life once ever phoned to ask me what happens if the milk spoon gets washed up in the meat sink. Fascinating, right? So what's the common denominator between all of these things? What does it tell you? So this very, very well-known talk that the Rebbe gave about Pesach, where the Rebbe basically says, in our tradition, in the Chabad tradition, as is in the tradition of various other Hasidic groups who follow a particular mystical tradition, the way that we order the questions of Manishtana is the secret to how to get children to be excited about Judaism. In the same way as it is so easy to get people to be excited about apples in honey, or eggs in salt water, or not going to the cemetery if you're pregnant, or a whole lot of other things that are not actual halacha. They're actually not Jewish law, but look how excited people get about them. That is the secret for how you get children to be excited about their Judaism. So you look at Manishtana, there are 4 questions, as we well know. What are the 4 questions? In the Ashkenazi tradition, the 4 questions start off with a question about chometz. How come every other night we can eat chometz, and tonight we can only eat matzah? And then from there you go to the other questions. You go from there to maror, and from there you go to the question about dipping, that we dip twice. First we dip the vegetable into salt water, later we dip the maror into the charoises. And then the last question is about leaning. In the Chabad custom, the order is different. The first item that the child asks about is, why do we dip? Why do we dip the vegetable into the salt water, and why do we dip the maror into the charoises? So the Rebbe's question about this is, it really doesn't seem to make any sense, because logic says that if you're going to give the child a script and say, right, we want you to ask these 4 questions because they're really important and they get to the heart of what Pesach is all about, then surely you're going to start with the first item being the one that the heart of Pesach is all about. So, out of those 4 questions, matzah, maror, dipping, and leaning to the left, which one really captures what the Torah says about Pesach? Matzah. The Torah doesn't say anything about leaning. The Torah says that the primary objective of Pesach, the main mitzvah of Pesach, is to avoid chometz and to eat matzah. Okay, you're only required to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. Outside of Israel, that's the first 2 nights of Pesach. And that is also the same time that you're required to tell the story of the Exodus. But out of the 4 things that are on the list, matzah is the most halachic of the lot. Now, how many people grow up so excited to eat matzah at the Seder? Hold on a second. I know this happens every single time. I've been giving shiurim about Pesach for enough years to know that there's always one crazy person in the group who says, I love matzah. I eat matzah the whole year round. And you know what my response is to that person? Right? You do, right? Yes? You eat matzah all year round? Sorry. Great. So I'm now going to say what I always say to everybody who tells me they love matzah. How much matzah do you eat in a sitting? Yeah. When you loving your matzah? Why did Mosmarks make the cracker, the snack size matzahs? That's for people who love matzah. Right? People who love matzah, you want that little square that's no bigger than 2 business cards, right? That's the matzah you want. And then, second question, how do you eat that matzah? Your favorite matzah is with? Egg. There we go. Egg, peanut butter. Some people, if you come from there's a Dutch tradition that you put margarine and sugar on matzah. Right? So that's how some of us grew up. Right? Some people, I love matzah with avocado. Thank God we're in the right hemisphere that they come out in season just in time for the matzah. Yeah, that's not how we eat matzah at the Seder. Nobody says, oh, I love the fact. First of all, 99% of all people who attend all Seders in the whole world do not eat matzah correctly. They're like, it's fine. Whoever's leading the Seder, you can do your thing. Because there are minimum requirements of how much matzah and how quickly you have to eat it. Nobody grows up saying, oh, I love the fact that we used to stuff down those matzahs in 3 minutes.
And not everyone's eating a shmira matzah.
Exactly. Handmade shmura matzah. Thank God, lately, the last few years it's come, I don't know what this year brings, but the last few years it's been thinner. There were years that matzah was so thick you got lockjaw. And you've got to eat a kazais, you've got to work out how much is a kazais, and you have those friendly people at your Seder who bring out that laminated sheet, and then they measure the matzah against the sheet, and they make you feel really inadequate, you know. Nobody grows up saying, oh, my favorite thing in the world was gagging on matzah at the Seder. And then just when you finish, what happens? They make you eat more. So first you've got to eat the matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. Then you've got to have more matzah when you have the sandwich. Then at the end, when you have the afikomen, where everybody's like, oh, we had a whole meal. So everybody, give me the smallest piece, as I get every single year at my Seder. Give me the smallest piece for the afikomen. That's all very well for you, but those of us who are trying to do this halachically, we're eating another whole kazayas. You know how much that is? That's a big chunk of shmura matzah. Depends on what size your shmura matzah is, right? And if you got the Mosmarks matzah, you're eating the whole thing. Nobody grows up loving that. But the fact that we've got to take a piece of vegetable, whichever vegetable you use, you know, some people it's parsley, other people it's onion, other people it's potato, and you've got to dip it in salt water, that's fun. Searching for the afikomen, which is not mandated by the Torah, that's fun. So there's two ways that you could look at Judaism. The one way you could look at Judaism is you get your child to ask questions from most valuable or most important to least important. In other words, one way which is very tempting for many parents is to say, matzah, people, you gotta have your matzah. If you don't have your matzah, you're not being Jewish. That's like fighting with your child to daven. That's what it's like. I'm not saying you shouldn't fight with your child to daven, but that's what it's like. Saying, this is what you have to do. It's not comfortable, it's not pleasant, but you gotta do it. Do we have a responsibility as parents to impose that on our children? Yes, we do. We have a responsibility to educate our children to do things that are not easy to do, because we want them to grow up to be resilient people who don't just go with whatever happens to be easiest. But that's not necessarily going to make them love their Judaism. So there's another way that you can arrange the order of the questions. And this is the way that we do it in Chabad. Question number 1, why do we dip on the Seder? So thank God for Shana said that right at the beginning, the egg in the salt water. It's actually not technically what we refer to when we ask about dipping, but it's still the same principle. You know, it's a bizarre thing. Let's be honest. We wouldn't do it any other time of our lives. Bring out salt water, start sticking vegetables in salt water. You know, if you've got somebody who's a little bit OCD at your table, and you're passing around the same salt water to everybody, and most people are not getting the vegetable in, they're getting half their fingers in. Right? So you get people who get a little bit uncomfortable.
But the egg's also not a halacha, hey?
Of course not halacha. Of course not halacha. That's my point. But it sticks in your head. Because ultimately, that's the interesting thing about traditions. Traditions are compelling. Traditions get in your head, even if they're not halachic. And you can get a school of thought that says, but it's only a minhag, it's only a tradition, and they could kind of make light of it. The most important thing is that you actually keep halacha. And while there is validity to that statement, you're not going to excite your children about their Judaism just with laws. The main thing that's going to capture their imagination is going to be our traditions. Even the tradition, let's say you have a family tradition to get dressed up for the Seder, okay, so it's not a universal tradition, but that's what sticks in the child's mind. The fact that we sing certain songs, that's what sticks in the children's minds. That we have apples and honey. That whatever, as you go through it. Challah is a tradition. And what people don't realize is traditions preserve Judaism. That's it. You know why? Because they're non-threatening. They're always a little bit more fun. And they're non-threatening, except for the one about not going to the cemetery when you're pregnant, because that's very threatening. Everybody gets really worried what's going to happen, and God forbid, and what kind of energies. But generally speaking, that's the message. That's what gets through. That's what gets into... I'll give you another example. South Africa is a very good example of this. How many South African Jewish women light Shabbos candles? I believe that it's probably a higher percentage than almost any Jewish community on earth. How many South African Jewish women light Shabbos candles at the correct time? Not so simple. Which means to say that there probably in winter are many Jewish women who have lit Shabbos candles their whole lives that light Shabbos candles once it's already Shabbos. So the law of the Torah is you have to keep Shabbos. You're not allowed to ignite a fire on Shabbos. The custom of Judaism is to light Shabbos candles. We could be very critical and say, you really shouldn't be doing this because it's against the law. And we'd be correct. And at the same time, something magical happens that's passed down traditionally. You can't formally endorse it because it breaks a law, but there is something to be said of that tradition that is passed down. I remember, I don't know if people still do it so much, but I remember when my cousin got married, I was probably in like grade 1 when my cousin got married. It was the first time I'd ever been to a Jewish wedding in my life. I was a little kid. Our family at that stage was just early from. And this part of the family had nothing to do with anything Jewish. And I'll never forget, stuck in my mind from that time. I don't even think I was in grade 1 yet, actually. I remember it was stuck in my mind from her wedding. We all went to the house before the chuppah, and she lit Shabbos candles. It was like a South African thing. The bride used to light Shabbos. It was like her commitment that she's going to light Shabbos candles. It was a phenomenal concept, right? Could have said to her, listen, you're about to start a new home, make sure your home is kosher, make sure you go to the mikveh, make sure... All these things are true. But there's something to be said about instilling the enthusiasm of customs. And that's really what that's so to speak, the secret recipe of the Pesach Seder for our kids is we've got to make a big deal about the customs. Very, very often people overlook them because they say the most important thing is as long as we're keeping the laws. We don't recognize that it's those things that are around the laws that often preserve the laws. So whether it's the guy playing the Mordechai Ben David's CD in his car when he has no other connection to his Judaism, or whether it's the person who has to have challah at their table because it keeps them linked to their Jewish identity, or whether it's the fact that you could get a little bit apathetic at some point and say, we're not going to do the hiding of the afikomen anymore. It just creates issues in the family. You realize that these are the traditions that keep Judaism alive. That's key to what's going to keep our children engaged and what's going to help them love their Judaism, even if some of them are just our own little family traditions, And so I'll give you an example. Certain families, you might have the same. They have certain parts of the Seder that they say with a particular tune, with a particular inflection, with a particular thing. It's a meshugas. But it gives you the sense of belonging. And that's what traditions do. Traditions shift my experience of Judaism from just being a series of laws that I have to conform to becoming something that's part of how I do life. This is how I do life. We have these traditions. This is what we do. So if we really, really want to get our kids on board, we have to pay attention. We have to really pay attention to customs, not only on the big yontivs, but every single day. There's certain things that are minhagim, that are customs that people just kind of overlook because they say, what's the big deal? And if we introduce these things into our children's lives, it gives them all these handles of connection, usually more fun-like connection or more positive connections and associations that they have with the Yiddishkeit that will help them to please God, cherish it for many, many, many years to come. Maybe even when they have bumps along the way with their religion, they'll still connect to their Judaism.